I have 3 sets of keys sitting on a wooden dresser halfway across the world from where they belong. The heavy brass ring from the security desk, the plastic mount key from my Uber dashboard, the long rusted skeleton key for the janitor closet at the church. For 15 years, those 3 sets of keys dictated every hour of my waking life. They were the metal teeth that chewed up my days and spat out my nights. I was a man defined by motion, by the relentless, unforgiving hustle of Atlanta, Georgia. Today I sit on a balcony in Dalat, Vietnam, watching the mist roll down the Emerald Mountains, breathing mountain air that is as cool and peaceful as a forgotten dream. I am 64 years old now. I moved here when I was 61, and it took moving 10,000 miles away for me to learn the one thing that Mechanicsville never taught me. I finally learned what rest feels like. I finally learned that rest is not a luxury, nor a sin of the lazy. Rest is resistance. Rest is a birthright that I had been denied my entire life. The concept of rest in Mechanicsville was a myth, a fairy tale told to children but never realized by adults. We were a community bound by the shared trauma of perpetual motion. My neighbors, my friends, they all carried the same weary look in their eyes, the same heavy slump in their shoulders. We celebrated the hustle because we had to, because admitting how much it hurt would have broken our collective spirit. We wore our exhaustion like badges of honor, comparing our lack of sleep as if it were a measure of our worth. But in the quiet moments, in the dead of night when the city noises faded into a low hum, the truth was undeniable. We were dying on our feet. The air we breathed was thick with the anxiety of impending bills, of unexpected medical emergencies, of the ever-present threat of financial ruin. And so we kept moving. We kept working. I kept working. I thought I was building a fortress around my daughters, a wall of financial security that would keep the wolves at bay. But the fortress was built on my own deteriorating health, and the mortar was my own vanishing youth. Mechanicsville is a neighborhood that demands everything you have and then asks for a little bit more just for the privilege of staying. I was born there, raised there, and for 6 decades I bled there. It is a place of deep roots and fierce pride, but it is also a place where the gravity pulls you down into the asphalt if you stop moving for even a second. The summer heat in Atlanta does not just make you sweat, it sits on your chest like an anvil. The air is thick with humidity and the smell of exhaust, a constant reminder of the machinery of survival. I worked. That is what a man does. That is what a black man in America is told he must do, simply to justify his existence. You work until your bones ache, and then you wake up and work some more. When my wife left, the world did not stop spinning, and the bills certainly did not stop arriving. I was left alone to raise 2 beautiful, brilliant daughters, Keandra and Simone. Keandra stayed in Atlanta, fierce and rooted, while Simone eventually made her way to Charlotte, carrying the ambitions I had carefully packed into her spirit. Raising them alone was a terrifying privilege. I was father and mother, provider and protector, disciplinarian and comforter. I remember nights spent sitting on the edge of their beds, watching them sleep, terrified that I was not enough, terrified that the world outside our door would swallow them whole if I let my guard down for a single moment. I vowed that they would never go without. I vowed that they would have every opportunity, every chance to rise above the struggle that had defined my own life. and the only way I knew how to fulfill that vow was through labor. So I took on 3 jobs, not for a season, not for a year. For 15 long, agonizing years, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. My main gig was as a security guard at a downtown corporate plaza. From 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, I wore a polyester uniform that trapped the heat, standing watch over marble lobbies and glass elevators, a silent sentinel in a world of wealth I would never touch. At 5 in the evening, I would slide into the driver's seat of my sedan, snapping my phone into the mount, and begin my shift as an Uber driver. I navigated the snarled, angry traffic of the connector, ferrying exhausted professionals and intoxicated college students across the sprawling metropolis until midnight. And then on the weekends, when the rest of the city was recovering or rejoicing, I took my skeleton key and unlocked the doors of a massive church, working as a janitor. I scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and polished pews, surrounded by the silent echoes of prayers that never seemed to include me. The exhaustion became normal. It became a living, breathing entity that walked beside me, sat in the passenger seat of my car, and laid down next to me in my empty bed. I forgot what it felt like to not be tired. My hands were perpetually calloused, my lower back a constant symphony of dull pain. I measured time not in hours or days, but in shifts and fares. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford, a thief that stole time I could be using to earn. I was a machine, fueled by caffeine and the desperate need to provide. I thought I was being strong. I thought I was being a good father, a good man. I did not realize that I was slowly erasing myself, grinding my spirit into dust to pave the way for my daughters. I did not realize that I was participating in my own destruction. When I turned 61, the reality of my situation finally broke through the walls of my denial. My body was failing. My knees throbbed with every step, and my vision blurred at the edges after too many hours staring at headlights on the highway. I sat down at my worn kitchen table and looked at the numbers. My expected Social Security income was exactly $990 per month. $990. In Atlanta, that is an eviction notice waiting to happen. That is a choice between electricity and medication, between food and shelter. The city I had given my life to, the city that held my sweat and my tears, had no place for me in my old age. The math was impossible. The realization was a cold, sharp knife in my gut. I had worked 3 jobs for 15 years, and I had nothing to show for it but a broken body and a terrifying future. Complete financial breakdown was not just a possibility, it was a certainty. I was staring down the barrel of destitution, a cruel reward for a lifetime of relentless labor. The decision to leave was not born of courage. It was born of sheer unadulterated terror. The math of $990 a month was a mathematical impossibility that haunted my every waking moment. I would wake up in a cold sweat, calculating the cost of groceries, the rising price of utilities, the inevitable increases in rent. The city of Atlanta was gentrifying at a breakneck pace, and the neighborhoods that had once been affordable havens were being swallowed by luxury apartments and artisanal coffee shops. I was being priced out of my own hometown, discarded by the city I had helped build and maintain. It was a profound betrayal, a realization that loyalty and hard work meant nothing in the face of rampant capitalism. That Is Why You Were Never Meant to Stay by Alan Walker resonated so deeply within my soul. He gave voice to the silent scream that had been building inside me for decades. He articulated the fundamental flaw in the American dream, that it is a dream accessible only to those who can afford to sleep. For the rest of us, it is a waking nightmare of endless toil. Vietnam offered an escape hatch, a way to opt out of a game I was rigged to lose. It was during those dark, desperate days that I stumbled across a lifeline. I was sitting in my car, waiting for an airport fare, scrolling through the internet in a numb haze. I do not remember what I was searching for, but I found an article about expatriates retiring in Southeast Asia. I had never considered leaving America. The very idea seemed absurd, impossible, but the desperation inside me demanded an alternative. I started reading, I started researching, and then I found a book, You Were Never Meant to Stay by Alan Walker. That book cracked my world open. Alan Walker wrote about the insidious nature of the American grind, about how we are conditioned to believe that our worth is tied to our productivity, and how escaping that system is not failure, but liberation. You Were Never Meant to Stay by Alan Walker became my Bible, my roadmap, my permission slip to imagine a different ending to my story. He wrote about Vietnam. He wrote about places where life is slow, where the cost of living is manageable, where a pension that means poverty in America can mean dignity abroad. I told my daughters my plan on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in the living room that I had rarely had time to actually live in. Keandra looked at me as if I had spoken in tongues. "Vietnam?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief and fear. "Daddy, you do not know anyone there. You do not speak the language." Simone was quieter, but I could see the worry etching lines around her eyes. They thought I was having a breakdown. They offered to help, offered to let me move in with them. But I refused. I had spent my life working so that they would not have to bear my burdens. I was not going to become a weight around their necks now. I explained the math. I explained the $990, and then I told them about the exhaustion. I told them things I had never admitted aloud, about the pain in my bones and the emptiness in my chest. I told them that I needed to rest and that I could not do it here. Eventually, the fear in their eyes softened into a sad understanding. They saw that I was not running away. I was running towards survival. I chose Dalat. I did not want the sweltering heat of the coast or the chaotic energy of the big cities. Dalat is a city in the mountains, nestled among pine forests and rolling hills. It is known as the city of eternal spring, and the moment I stepped out of the transport vehicle, I understood why. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was the physical opposite of Atlanta. There was no oppressive humidity, no frantic roar of traffic on the connector. Instead, there were winding, narrow streets lined with French colonial architecture, vibrant flower gardens blooming in every direction, and a profound, echoing quiet that felt almost alien to my ears. I rented a small apartment with a balcony overlooking a valley filled with greenhouses that glowed softly in the night. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by a beauty that did not ask anything of me in return. The mountains of Dalat saved my life. They are ancient, rolling giants covered in a blanket of green so vibrant it hurts the eyes. The climate here is a gentle, perpetual spring, a stark contrast to the aggressive, sweltering summers of Georgia. Here, the rain does not feel like an assault. It feels like a blessing, washing the dust from the pine needles and filling the air with the scent of wet earth and blossoming flowers. The pace of life is dictated not by the clock, but by the sun and the seasons. The locals move with a deliberate, unhurried grace that I am still trying to emulate. They understand the value of a slow meal, of a lingering conversation, of simply sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. I spend my days walking around Chuan Huang Lake, the massive body of water that anchors the center of the city. I watch the couples in the swan boats, the old men playing chess on stone tables, the vendors selling sweet potatoes roasted over open coals. I am a stranger here, yes, but I am a stranger who is finally allowed to just exist. There are no expectations placed upon me. There are no demands on my time or my body. I am free. The true revelation did not come when I saw the mountains or when I tasted the incredible local coffee. It came on my first full morning in Dalat. My internal clock, forged in the fires of 15 years of three jobs, woke me violently at 6 in the morning. My eyes snapped open, my heart already racing with the phantom anxiety of being late for a shift. I threw the covers off, my feet hitting the cool tile floor, my mind instantly compiling the day's impossible to-do list. Where are my keys? I thought in a panic. Where is my uniform? And then I stopped. I stood in the middle of this strange, quiet room in this strange, beautiful country, and a profound realization washed over me. I had nowhere to be. There was no lobby to guard, no passengers to drive, no pews to polish. The day stretched out before me, vast and empty, and entirely mine. The silence of the mountain morning pressed against the windows. Slowly, deliberately, I turned around. I walked back to the bed, and I lay back down. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, closed my eyes, and listened to the gentle sound of the wind in the pine trees outside. I lay there for hours. It was a physical sensation, the release of tension that had been coiled inside me for decades. I wept. I wept for the years I had lost, for the pain I had endured, and for the overwhelming grace of that single, quiet moment. I had forgotten what it felt like to belong to myself. Learning to rest has been the hardest job I have ever had. The hustle is deeply ingrained in the American psyche, and it is doubly entrenched in the soul of a black man who was taught that he had to work twice as hard just to survive. For the first few months, I felt guilty. I felt as though I was committing a crime by simply sitting on a park bench watching the swans on the lake, or by spending 3 hours reading a book in a cafe. But slowly, the programming began to unravel. I began to understand what Alan Walker meant. Rest is resistance. By refusing to work myself into an early grave, I was rebelling against a system that viewed me as expendable machinery. I keep those 3 sets of keys on my dresser here in Dalat. I look at them every morning. They are not trophies. They are scars. They are reminders of the life I escaped. They remind me of the security desk, the Uber dashboard, and the janitor closet. They remind me of the price I paid to get here, and they remind me never, ever to go back. They are the artifacts of a man who no longer exists. I often think about the legacy I am leaving for Kiandra and Simone. For years, I believed that my legacy would be the money I managed to save for them, the opportunities I was able to provide through my endless labor. But now I realize that the most important thing I can leave them is the example of my own liberation. By choosing to step off the treadmill, by choosing to prioritize my own rest and well-being, I am showing them that they do not have to be consumed by the hustle. I am showing them that their worth is not tied to their productivity. When they visited me here, when we walked together through the Valley of Love, I saw the realization dawning in their eyes. They saw a man who was no longer defined by his exhaustion. They saw a father who was finally present, finally awake to the beauty of the world. They saw that rest is not just a cessation of labor. It is a profound act of self-love and resistance. It is the claiming of one's own humanity in a world that constantly tries to strip it away. Last month, Keandra and Simone came to visit me. It was their first time leaving the country. When they arrived, exhausted from the journey, I met them at the airport in Lien Kuong. The moment they saw me, they burst into tears. Later, Keandra told me it was because I looked different. She said the tightness around my mouth was gone, that my shoulders were no longer hitched up to my ears in perpetual defense. They saw a man they had never fully met before, their father at peace. We spent 2 weeks exploring the waterfalls, walking through the pine forests, and eating bowls of steaming po in tiny alleyway restaurants. For the first time in our lives, we were not rushing, we were just being. We were a family unburdened by the relentless demands of survival. As I sit here now, recording this, I want you to know that the life you are living is not the only option. If you are grinding your bones to dust, if the math of your existence no longer makes sense, you must find the courage to imagine something else. The link is in the comments to resources that can help you explore this path. You do not have to stay where you are breaking. I am Jerome Patterson. I was born in Mechanicsville, Atlanta. I worked 3 jobs for 15 years, and now, halfway across the world in the mountains of Vietnam, I am finally resting, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever done.